The latest revelations from the young and the restless paint a picture that looks almost harmless at first glance. Dominic Winters is with his Aunt Mariah, the woman who gave birth to him. And the two of them are seen playing, sightseeing, traveling, moving through the world as if this is simply a strange little family detour, one of those temporary, emotional detours that soap operas love to romanticize until the camera stops lingering on the smiles and starts showing the cracks. Because the truth underneath those sweet images is not sweet at all. Mariah has committed a kidnapping. Mariah has taken a child who is not hers to keep. And whatever softness she's showing Dominic, whatever tenderness she's trying to convince herself is proof that she's doing the right thing, does not change the reality that her mind has fractured in a way that is now endangering everyone involved, including the one person who never had a choice in any of this. The chilling part is that the situation is emotionally complicated in exactly the way the young and the restless excels at. Because Mariah isn't behaving like a cartoon villain snatching a baby for money or revenge. She's behaving like someone who truly believes she is protecting Dominic, like someone who is trying to rewrite her own story by stealing a page out of someone else's life. And that is what makes her so dangerous right now, because a person who knows they're wrong might hesitate, but a person who feels righteous in their delusion only tightens their grip. And hovering over all of it is that old, poisonous question the show keeps staring us to ask: is Mariah acting alone? Or is she being guided by someone who knows exactly how to exploit her vulnerabilities? Unless Ian Ward, that sinister pastor and master manipulator, is still alive, then Mariah is taking advice from a voice that is useless at best and destructive at worst. But even if Ian isn't physically present, the damage he left behind can still speak. Trauma doesn't need a body to haunt you. It only needs memory, fear, and a weak moment. What makes this storyline feel especially brutal is the way it forces Devon and Abby Winters to suffer in a specific kind of slow torture. The kind where hope and horror take turns sitting in your chest like two rival hearts. They are living through an emotional purgatory while they wait to be reunited with their son, and they aren't guessing, they aren't imagining, they aren't wondering if something might have happened. They know Mariah took Dominic. They have legitimate reason to believe it. And in Genoa City, where secrets are currency and betrayal is a neighborhood sport, that certainty doesn't bring relief. It brings panic, because certainty means you can't lie to yourself anymore. Devon and Abby aren't just afraid that Dominic is missing, they're afraid of what Mariah might do next, and they're afraid of what they might be forced to do to get him back. Their situation is made even more complicated by the two facts that hang over this story like a verdict waiting to be delivered. First, Mariah is clearly unwell. And second, she once wanted to be Dominic's mother deeply, painfully, in a way that wasn't casual or fleeting but fundamental. That desire didn't simply vanish when Dominic went home with Devon and Abby. It stayed inside Mariah like an ache she never fully confessed. And now it's erupting into something unrecognizable. If you step back and look at Mariah's history, this collapse isn't coming from nowhere. She has always carried the scars of a life shaped by a cult, by manipulation disguised as faith, by authority figures who taught her to doubt her own instincts and obey someone else's truth. Those experiences don't just disappear because you move away or build a new relationship or start functioning like everyone else. They become part of the architecture of your mind, and under stress, that architecture can start to shift in terrifying ways. And yet, that's also why this story hurts so much, because for most of her life, Mariah has tried to be good, not perfect, not spotless, but genuinely present. She has been, more often than not, an active and thoughtful member of her community, a person who shows up for the people she loves, who tries to grow, who tries to overcome what was done to her. That is why many viewers want to believe she can recover. There is no reason to assume she is beyond saving, and no reason to think her story must end in permanent darkness. But there is a big difference between believing someone can recover and pretending they are not currently a danger. Mariah's love for Dominic, real or imagined, is now tangled up with a mindset that justifies criminal behavior as if it's maternal devotion. That is not stability. That is not love in its healthy form. That is obsession dressed up as rescue. The tragedy is that from Mariah's perspective, the kidnapping may not feel like a crime. It may feel like a correction, a second chance, a way to rewrite a chapter she never agreed to close. Dominic is not just a child to her, he is a symbol. He represents identity, belonging, purpose, redemption. In her distorted emotional logic, being with him might feel like proof that she can be the mother she always wanted to be, the mother she never got to witness, the mother she never trusted the world would allow her to become. And when a person attaches that much meaning to one living, breathing child, the line between nurturing and possessing becomes razor thin. It's easy to imagine Mariah telling herself that Devon and Abby don't understand Dominic the way she does, that they don't see what he needs, that she's the only one who can keep him safe. That's the kind of thinking that can become a spiral. Every step you take away from reality makes it harder to return, because returning means admitting you did something unforgivable. Instead, the mind protects itself by doubling down. It turns the kidnapping into a mission. It turns fear into a prophecy. It turns guilt into certainty that everyone else is wrong. And in a story like this, that internal spiral is often more frightening than any external villain. Meanwhile, Devon and Abby are being forced to live with the cruel paradox of Mariah's role in their lives. She is both family and threat. She is someone they once trusted, someone who helped bring Dominic into their world, someone whose closeness to their son was once part of the love that surrounded him. Now, that same closeness is a weapon, maybe not intentionally, but effectively. Devon and Abby cannot treat this like a simple case of a stranger kidnapping a child, because if they do, they risk ignoring the psychological component that could make Mariah unpredictable. But if they treat it like purely a mental health crisis, they risk minimizing the fact that Dominic's safety is the priority and that a crime has been committed. This is the kind of gray area where families break apart, because every reaction feels wrong in a different way. Call the police, and you risk pushing Mariah into panic. Try to negotiate quietly, and you risk losing crucial time. Treat Mariah like a criminal, and you might never forgive yourself if she collapses completely. Treat her like a victim, and you might never forgive yourself if Dominic is harmed. That's the trap the young and the restless has set, and it is the kind of trap that produces long-term fallout even after the child is recovered. Because the emotional damage does not reset once the plot is resolved. It lingers in every relationship like invisible bruises. And then there's the inward factor, which makes everything feel more ominous even if he never appears on screen. Ian is not just a person in Mariah's past. He is the embodiment of what happened to her when she was too young, too vulnerable, too hungry for belonging to protect herself. If he is alive, then the possibility that he is whispering into Mariah's current crisis changes the stakes entirely, because Ian doesn't just manipulate, he strategizes. He would know how to frame the kidnapping as divine purpose, how to convince Mariah she is rescuing Dominic from a world that will corrupt him, how to turn her fear into devotion, and her devotion into obedience. And if Ian is not alive, then the story becomes even more heartbreaking, because it suggests Mariah is still fighting his influence anyway, like an infection in the bloodstream of her memories. In either scenario, the point is the same: the past has reached forward and grabbed the present by the throat. The cult trauma is not a closed chapter. It is a trigger that can be reactivated. And when it reactivates, it doesn't just harm Mariah, it threatens to harm an entire family. But here is where the storyline can deliver something unexpectedly meaningful, something that goes beyond shock value and enters the territory of tragic necessity. Because out of this chaos, an unplanned, complicated good could still emerge, not a happy ending, not a clean resolution, but a consequence that forces long overdue truth into the open. This kidnapping may become the moment Genoa City can no longer ignore Mariah's mental health, can no longer handle her pain with half measures and comforting phrases. It could become the moment that Devon, Abby, Sharon, and everyone who loves Mariah is forced to stop treating her wounds like background noise and start treating them like a crisis that deserves real, sustained intervention. The ugly irony is that sometimes a person has to fall in the most visible way before the people around them stop pretending they are fine. If Dominic is recovered safely, and the show will likely make that a cliffhanger that stretches hearts to the breaking point, then the aftermath won't just be legal. It will be psychological. It will be a reckoning. It will be a mirror held up to everyone who missed the signs, who assumed Mariah's strength meant her trauma was gone, who treated her past as an old storyline instead of a living wound. That reckoning could lead to something Mariah has needed for a long time, a real path to healing that doesn't depend on her being strong enough to fix herself alone. And for Devon and Abby, the unintended consequence could be a deeper understanding of what family really means in their world, how love can be both shelter and storm, how good intentions can become harm, and how boundaries are not acts of cruelty but acts of protection. They will likely come out of this changed, more guarded, more fierce, more aware that even the people you love most can become dangerous when they are drowning inside themselves. That awareness will not make them colder, it will make them more deliberate, more protective, more unwilling to romanticize pain. And Dominic, even as a child, will become the silent center of that transformation, the reason the adults around him are forced to confront their own choices, their own blind spots, their own need to control narratives that were never fully under their control. Mariah's story, as dark as it is right now, does not have to be a story of permanent villainy. It can be a story of consequences, accountability, and recovery. But recovery in the young and the restless never comes without scars, and the scars here will be heavy. A family's trust shattered, a sister's mental stability publicly exposed, a child's safety used as the battleground for adult pain. The show's greatest strength is that it understands how one desperate, irrational act can ripple outward and reshape everything. If the writers lean into that truth, then this kidnapping won't just be a shocking plot twist. It will be the spark that forces a long, overdue reckoning with trauma, faith manipulation, maternal longing, and the kind of mental break that doesn't announce itself with villain music, but with a smile that looks almost normal until you remember what it's hiding. And that's what makes the story so frightening and so compelling. The horror isn't that Mariah is out there with Dominic. The horror is that, in her mind, she may truly believe she is finally doing something right up until the moment the world catches up to her and demands that she face what she has actually done. In the aftermath of Dominic Winter's safe rescue, the immediate crisis may be over, but the real damage is only beginning to surface, quietly and relentlessly, inside the people who are supposed to rebuild what was broken. On the surface, Genoa City breathes a collective sigh of relief that the child is home, and harmed, alive, but beneath that fragile calm lies a conflict far more corrosive than the kidnapping itself. A fundamental divide between Devon and Abby over what should happen next to Mariah. Justice, accountability, compassion, fear, and grief collide in a way that exposes fault lines neither of them realized were already there. And the question of Mariah's future quickly becomes the catalyst for a marital fracture that may prove harder to mend than the trauma of Dominic's disappearance. Devon approaches the situation from a place of reasoned concern, insisting that Mariah is not a monster but a deeply unwell woman whose actions were driven by psychological collapse rather than malice. From his perspective, punishment without treatment would be both cruel and ineffective. A reactionary response that ignores the years of trauma Mariah carries and the obvious signs that she was not acting with a clear or stable mind. Abby, on the other hand, cannot separate theory from lived experience, because while Devon is weighing diagnoses and emotional nuance, she is still reliving the terror of having her child ripped from her arms, still feeling the primal violation of motherhood being invaded and overturned. Her rage is not abstract, not philosophical, but visceral and consuming, rooted in the undeniable truth that Mariah stole her son, endangered him, and shattered her sense of safety in the most intimate way possible. Neither of them is wrong, yet the fact that both positions are valid does not make them compatible, and this disagreement is not about policy or opinion but about identity, values, and emotional survival. For Abby, the idea of leniency feels like betrayal, not just of her pain but of Dominic himself, because to soften the consequences is to minimize what was done, to suggest that love or illness somehow excuses the theft of a child. Every instinct in her demands a clear line be drawn, a boundary enforced, a message sent that no one, regardless of intention or trauma, gets to cross that line without consequence. Devon, meanwhile, feels the ground shifting beneath him as he watches Abby's anger harden into something inflexible, something that leaves no room for empathy. And that frightens him in a different way. He understands Abby's fury, but he also recognizes the danger of letting vengeance masquerade as justice, especially when the person being condemned is someone they once trusted. Someone who helped bring Dominic into the world, someone whose breakdown was visible long before it became catastrophic. The argument over Mariah is no longer just about her fate. It becomes a referendum on how Devon and Abby see the world, how they define responsibility, and how much grace they believe anyone deserves once irreparable harm has been done. And when couples clash over something this fundamental, love alone is rarely enough to bridge the gap. As if this emotional battlefield were not enough, Devon's world continues to collapse around him in ways that feel almost cruelly excessive, piling crisis upon crisis until resilience itself feels like an unreasonable expectation. Just as he is struggling to process Dominic's kidnapping and the shockwaves it has sent through his marriage, Devon is blindsided by yet another nightmare. His sister Lily Winters and her children are themselves caught in a situation disturbingly reminiscent of what he has just survived. The word kidnap carries a different weight when you have already lived through it once, and for Devon, it becomes unbearable. A confirmation that stability is an illusion and safety a temporary state that can be ripped away without warning. He is now facing two parallel traumas, both involving children he loves, both triggering his deepest fears of helplessness and failure. And this emotional overload hits a man who was never particularly built for chaos to begin with. Even in calm times, Devon has often carried himself with a kind of quiet heaviness, moving through life more contemplative than reactive, more burdened than energized. And now that natural tendency toward withdrawal threatens to turn into emotional paralysis. The question, then, is not simply who will help Devon through this, but whether he will even allow himself to be helped, or whether he will retreat inward, crushed beneath the responsibility of being strong when everything inside him is breaking. Abby is consumed by her own anger and fear, Lily is unreachable in her own crisis, and the usual emotional anchors in Devon's life are either compromised or overwhelmed. It is in this vacuum that the most unsettling possibility begins to take shape, that Mariah, the very person at the center of so much devastation, may also be the one uniquely positioned to understand Devon's unraveling. This is not because she is innocent, nor because she deserves forgiveness, but because she, too, knows what it feels like to lose control of your life, to watch your identity fracture under the weight of trauma, and to cling desperately to something that makes you feel whole, even if it costs everything else. Ironically, the fact that Dominic was found safe and unharmed may intensify rather than ease the conflict surrounding Mariah's fate. Abby's instinct is to push for severe consequences now, while the emotional truth of the kidnapping is still raw and undeniable, believing that anything less would be a failure to protect her child and herself. Devon, however, finds himself increasingly sympathetic to Mariah as Abby's calls for harsh punishment grow louder and more absolute. He cannot ignore the reality that Mariah loves Dominic deeply, that she bonded with him in a way that went beyond biology or circumstance, that she even gave him a name of her own, Bowie. A name that reveals how fully she had integrated him into her emotional universe. That love does not excuse what she did, but it complicates it, forcing Devon to confront the uncomfortable truth that the line between devotion and destruction can be terrifyingly thin when mental health is left untreated. As Devon's marriage begins to strain under the weight of these unresolved tensions, the possibility emerges that he may feel compelled to stand by Mariah not in defiance of Abby, but in defense of a worldview that refuses to reduce a broken person to their worst act. Yet this choice comes at a steep price. Aligning himself, even partially, with Mariah risks alienating Abby at the moment she needs reassurance the most, confirming her fear that her pain will always be secondary to someone else's suffering. At the same time, rejecting Mariah entirely would feel like a moral failure to Devon, a denial of everything he believes about compassion, trauma, and the responsibility of family to intervene before punishment becomes abandonment. He is trapped between two unbearable options, and the pressure of recent events threatens to collapse his emotional equilibrium altogether. What makes this storyline particularly devastating is that there are no clean resolutions waiting at the end of it. Mariah must face consequences. That is unavoidable. Abby's anger will not simply evaporate because time passes. Devon's grief and exhaustion cannot be solved by a single act of forgiveness or defiance. Instead, the narrative moves into murkier territory, where love and resentment coexist, where understanding does not erase betrayal, and where survival itself becomes an active choice rather than a given. Whether Devon ultimately stands by Mariah, distances himself from her, or attempts the impossible task of bridging the gap between her and Abby, one truth remains clear. The kidnapping of Dominic was not an isolated tragedy but a fracture point, one that has exposed the fragility of every relationship it touched. And as Devon stands at the center of this emotional wreckage, pulled in opposing directions by loyalty, empathy, and despair, the real question is no longer what will happen to Mariah, but whether his marriage, his family, and his own sense of self can survive the consequences of a crime that changed all of them forever.